One thing when talking about predictions of history is that no matter how by the books you are, no matter how many references, no matter how smart you are, no matter how much research you delve when you're talking about your predictions, you're never ever going to be perfect with your prediction. However, that is what's so alluring when it comes to talking about history. You want to be the one who can brag, saying how you were the closest to whatever actually ended up happening. And here I'm going to be giving my 2 cents on how the United States is most likely going to enter a civil war and how that civil war will likely end. Now, when talking about something as huge and massive as a possible civil war, I feel a lot of people, even if they never would admit this publicly or even openly, I feel are in agreement that there is going to be a civil war within the United States. When looking at the many things we, the American citizens, see in our lives, we are exposed to a lot of messages from media and even people in our lives. And what we are being exposed to is not pretty. Americans are more divided and bitter towards the opposite aisle ever more than before. There are countless examples of things that divide us to the point where most of us are afraid to express ourselves out in the open out of fear of facing retribution or retaliation, no matter how trivial or minute the things we wish to express even are. One example of this is how the voting patterns between Americans are. Americans, with very minor exceptions, vote on a two-party system, Democrat and Republican. And what is quite surprising about this is that for mostly the past 40 years or so, elections have been neck and neck. Outside of the landslide of Ronald Reagan against Walter Mondale, the results of the election have been really close overall. Not all have been neck and neck literal, but there have been a lot of cases that are a lot closer than you'd probably expect, especially for such a long stretch period of time of 40 fucking years of voting patterns. All the way up to the latest elections that the United States has had for president, the results have been very, very close. And not only have the results been very close, there is an ever increasing skepticism and distrust of the results for candidates on both sides. And me, myself, I also hold doubt and skepticism over many results, especially within the past two elections. And this is becoming more common within the people of the United States, as I said, on both sides. Both sides not only question the legitimacy of outcomes from both sides, but both sides are increasingly becoming threatening with actions, whether this may be secession, holding votes, spending an increasingly lengthy time counting votes, lawsuits, claims of voter fraud, gerrymandering, and many more actions. This shows not only are Americans becoming increasingly distrustful of their own government, but they are developing resentment and even a hatred towards their fellow countrymen. It's not just terms of voting and the outcome of those elections that is showing the people of the United States becoming increasingly divisive. Many things not initially related to politics are being carved out by different types of people. For example, how money is spent and who shops at what types of businesses is becoming an increasingly common way to determine where someone stands politically. One example I would like to show you would be grocery stores. If you were to go to certain types of chains and stores, you can, for the most part, easily tell who typically shops there. In the case of big box grocery stores, for example, I've experienced that people who are more right leaning in terms of political views shop at places like Walmart. These people typically will shop here because they want the cheapest goods that they can get a hold of. And since Walmart is usually cheaper than any other store, this draws in right leaning people. And this allows them to get a hold of desired types of products, such as meat, dairy, junk food, foods that people on the left typically don't consume. This also is certain products and things that you can't buy at other stores, mainly power tools, tires, motor oil, fishing equipment, even firearms and ammunition, depending on the Walmart. People on the left, however, will typically go towards Target. Target is often seen as the more expensive but quote unquote better place to shop. The extra cost of food for the people who shop at Target is often justified because the people on the left often care about issues such as animal cruelty, humanity, ethically produced and clean forms of products. Stuff like non GMO grains, grass fed meat, meat substitutes, name brand products, and an overall cleaner atmosphere. This is not only applicable to how people shop, mind you. The mannerisms the people have, how they dress, talk, express emotions, decide who they hang out with, the jobs they work, the things they eat and drink, the sayings of expression, the way they speak. Pretty much everything the American people do will show where they stand in terms of politics. If you doubt this, I want you to take a mental note of what I've said here and try it throughout your day. As you interact or even just glance at people, have a rough idea of how someone on the right or left of the political side would stereotypically act and perform within society, and see if you can put that person in one or two camps really easily or not. So, what does this mean for people like you and I? A lot, and sadly, none of it is good. This has helped fuel an increasing disgust and hatred towards people who disagree with you. And we have all become entrenched in this. With the help of the media and the constant messages being pumped out from both sides of the political side and the media ties that they have, people are slowly becoming increasingly bitter and angry towards each other. It's not even uncommon to overhear friends and family talking about current issues, and if something bad were to happen to someone they would disagree with, you will often hear them satisfied or happy that it's happened. This applies to all forms of negativity, from people getting fired, people getting locked up, people being killed in horrific acts of violence, even school shootings and office shootings. I'm not making that up, by the way. I've experienced people close to me express happiness that people they probably would not have liked politically were happy that they got killed in a horrific way or their life has been ruined with imprisonment. It's pretty fucked up out there. You may not even know it, you're just so desensitized to it. It's awful. Another issue that fuels this is the increasing issues the average person in America faces. When trying to simply live their life, one of the biggest factors that is driving overall stress and hardship in their life is the cost of living. The cost of living is not only increasing, but rapidly increasing. And to top that off, wages for workers have stagnated for a really long time. The cost of living for the average American has not only gone up, but rapidly gone up. Many things that would be considered half as much or less than what they were merely 2 or 3 years ago has now doubled, if not tripled. Groceries, insurance, vehicles, real estate, restaurants, personal enjoyment, vacations, pretty much everything has increased at least twofold, making it extremely stressful for families to support their loved ones or even just live a comfortable life for themselves. Now, there are many reasons why the cost of living has gone up so radically within the past few years, and one of those would be the mass printing of currency. Inflation is caused when the overall supply of currency is increased, but the available goods and services either stays the same or decreases. Within the past 2 years alone, Joseph Biden and his administration have printed trillions of dollars, devaluing the currency even more than it already was from the previous levels within the past few decades. So while you may have more money, the buying power of that money is shrinking more and more with each passing day. I'm not joking. Another major problem is the influx of both women and migrants into the labor force. Labor, just like any other good or service, is based on supply and demand. The more supply you have, the more you can meet demand, and the more demand is, the higher the price of the supply will be, and labor is no exception. After the feminist movement within the United States, women have ever increasingly entered the workforce rather than do what they traditionally have done for thousands of years, which is stay home and keep the family intact while the father went to work. This has led to an increase in supply of laborers within the market, and when there is an increase in supply of something, the price will go down, because that's how simple economics works. This problem has also been drastically exacerbated with the overall increasing influx of migrants, both legal and illegal. When you have people who come from countries with a poor way of life, they will always undercut workers for cheaper than the native population. This will reduce the price of labor for the average person, meaning the ones who do get to work will be working for less than they would have originally worked for had the women and migrants have simply not been factors. Another economical issue many people face, which I will admit is quite interesting to see, is how, due to so many social programs and welfare being so easily accessible by large portions of the population, no one wants to work. This is quite an odd thing to see in history. Usually, when people aren't working, it's because they can't work, because jobs are so rare or there is a depression. However, this isn't exactly the case. Due to so many programs and printing of money, people can simply go on benefits and live in a government subsidized house, enjoying heavily reduced or free housing, food, and basic accommodations. And when people are living it up on the government's tit, others are going to follow, leading to a really large percentage of working men who can work if they wanted to, but aren't. Because why would they? It's easier to take a check from the government and just sit on your fat ass all day. Without proper pay and compensation for the work needed to keep the gears greased and working, people are just not going to bother. I mean, let's be honest. Why should you or I go to work we fucking hate, having to deal with a sociopathic boss who almost sexually enjoys humiliating and hanging some shitty little wagey cagey paycheck over you? To deal with customers who will get away with so much and they will always blame you for every issue they may or may not have with the product they ordered. It's horrific. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. And this is a problem because most people do, in fact, want to work. They want to see the fruits of their labor, and they want to work for a better life, where they work to move into a better area, to eat better food, to be able to enjoy their hobbies and interests more often, to buy homes, to have children, to live a debt free life, to be more and more open to so many avenues and opportunities. And more people in America can't do that. So many people simply just live in this half alive, I'm just going through the motions, where they will often turn to coping mechanisms such as drugs, alcohol, pornography, and a lot of other very destructive habits to just kind of ignore and block out the increasing hopelessness many people in America feel right now. And I bring this up because this is a dangerous thing to have your population feel, to feel hopeless, angry, bitter, hate filled. When people are hate filled, they will often become motivated to solve the problems they perceive in life at any cost necessary. And this includes violence. This is how almost all rebellions, revolts, and coups have happened throughout history. When enough people, typically young men who feel hopeless and alone, link up and use their combined strength and brain power to fight a supposed evil they face, oh my goodness, you want to talk about hell on earth? That's hell on earth. After all, what's the better option for them? To die on your feet trying to make the world a better place for you, for God, for your family, your children, and your everyday common man that you associate with? Or to just lay down and slowly die while things get worse for you and your family as it goes on? Now, earlier in the video, I said no matter how much history or examples of history you go back to, your predictions will never be right on the money. However, I do feel very confident with this example of history repeating itself, and that being America is following extremely closely to the Weimar Republic of Germany after World War I. Now, after Germany lost the war, the country faced a whole host of problems, one being needing to pay an extraordinary amount of debt to other countries, that being in the form of reparations to countries such as France and Britain. This led to the Weimar Republic in a desperate bind where they needed to attempt to pay off this massive debt that they had to pay to other countries. So, they printed money. They printed absolutely fuck tons of money. However, as we know, printing money never solves debt issues, it only makes the problems worse. This leads to extremely horrific economic problems where people could not work and the cost of living became retarded expensive. It was so bad that a simple loaf of bread costed millions of Reichmarks. People were so desperate for food and basic necessities to live, they resorted to bartering and trading. They would trade sausages for other desired products, and they would trade coal and wood just to get groceries. It was so bad that the Weimar Republic people would just line up their walls with Reichmarks as wallpaper, and they would burn the bills as a form of heating their home. The pressure of paying off debts and massive printing of bills led to extreme poverty and a debt that could never ever be paid off. Another issue the Weimar Republic had was the influx of other nations with their own personal vested interests. As the Weimar Republic tried to become friendly with many other nations after the war, this led to many countries having a heavy hand in expanding their culture, ideals, and interests within the country. Countries like France, Britain, Poland, the United States, the Soviet Union, and many more were trying to expand into the nation for their interests. And this would anger and infuriate a good portion of the native population, seeing as a form of selling out and devaluing their culture and customs. Seeing other countrymen buddy up with foreigners for the sake of self profit in exchange for trading in their principles and values of your country that they hold dear. This would make anyone who cares about their nation fill with a ball of rage. And yet, another issue that plagued the Weimar Republic was the whittling away of social norms, normalizing taboos, and allowing degenerate actions to become not only tolerated but forced upon the populace. A prime example of this would be Berlin. Berlin, during the Weimar's reign, became the prostitution capital of the world. Not only was prostitution legalized, but it was encouraged both legally and socially. And this applied to underage children as well. Children were, in fact, prostitutes for adults. Many of the sexual taboos many people throughout history have shunned and shamed were not only suddenly allowed to happen, but were celebrated. Pedophilia, homosexuality, transsexuality, polyamory, open relationships, extreme fetishism, and many more were extremely common. In fact, the first transgender surgery was completed in Berlin in the Weimar Republic reign. I believe 1932, but I could be mistaken. This would already prove or provoke an already upset populace who disagree with the other countries meddling with their lands even more, because these people would also be more socially conservative, hating such extreme and taboo fetishism that was rapidly dropped onto the populace. These are some of the largest factors that led to the eventual collapse of the Weimar Republic. There are many, many other factors that have and will be debated by historians for who knows how long on what may or may not have contributed to the Weimar's fall. One example of this would be the many revolts and revolutions many political groups were trying to achieve, like the Jewish communist-led German Revolution of 1918 to 1919, where there were so many minor political parties that would clash and fight over the next decades and attempt to vie power for them and their causes. And what is truly scary is that we can see history repeating itself in America. America is the 21st century Weimar. America has a horribly huge debt, owing trillions upon trillions of dollars to many nations, China for the most part. A debt that realistically can never be paid off. In fact, this debt only ever rises. The current administration of Joseph Biden has reportedly spent over $4 trillion, despite claiming he cut the debt by almost $2 million. America also has problems with other nations trying to vie themselves into the country for their own political reasons. We see a large amount of European Union countries trying to shame and shun America for not being more like a European-run country with a more socialist way of running the economy. We see Mexicans flooding into the border in absolutely huge droves every day, destabilizing the quality of life the native population is accustomed to. We see rampant sexual pushes onto the masses, ones that an overwhelming majority of people do not agree with, even if they're not going to say that openly. Pornography is extremely accessible, being only a click away on the internet, and then you could be exposed to a whole host of fetishes and types of porn. There is a pervasive push towards transgenderism and homosexuality. This cult-like group not only wants tolerance, but they want everyone to forcibly accept them, and if they don't, there will be repercussions. You could lose your job, you could be assaulted, you could be murdered, you could be socially shunned, never able to function in society ever again. Our children are becoming increasingly exposed to these disgusting things at a much earlier age without their parents' approval or guidance. Often put into public schools controlled by the government, our kids are exposed to extremely pervasive things, often brainwashing and confusing them, leading to a damaged and upset society. To say America isn't like the Weimar Republic would be a completely fucking retarded thing to say otherwise. The writing is not only on the wall, it's being broadcast into your minds 24/7 like it's a good thing. And if you know history, you know how the Weimar Republic ended, with an overthrow of the previous government, with a violent and all-encompassing regime.
Now, nobody has ever analyzed why the German nation that had more Nobel Prize winners and more famous researchers and scientists and was one of the best educated countries in Europe turn on the Jews. Why did these good Germans turn on the Jews, who had more Jews living amongst them than even percentage-wise live in the United States today? Why was that?
I'm sure
Jews never asked themselves this question.
I'm sure I'll get the answer from you now.
Yeah, I can give you the answer.
Please.
Because they displayed the same voracious ethnocentrism, power-grabbing, influence peddling, buying of politicians, dominating of the public airwaves and the public media in Germany and so on, that they display in the United States. And I'm not much of a prophet, but that much I can say based on history, that in the United States, mark my word, you will have Weimar conditions and you'll have solutions to the Weimar conditions. It will be very similar to what happened in Germany.
You mean the final solution will be
You have
repeated in the United States?
whatever the Holocaust war, you've got one in your future.
Really?
That's right. Why? Because
How soon, by the way?
how soon? That depends entirely on how long the people, the power structure in the Western world is going to stay on top. I mean, if you look at East Germany, how quickly it collapsed, or the former Soviet Union, how quickly it collapsed with all its secret services, spy agencies, NKVD, and Stasis, it imploded so quickly, I have no idea. But there is no doubt in my mind that if you look at history and the trends in history, the United States is heading in the same direction. And there's only one difference. In the United States, there are enough guns out on the street and enough lawlessness in the public and a revolutionary spirit that founded that republic. This is not Germany, where the only people that had guns were hunters and soldiers and policemen. The United States is armed to the teeth. They have a spirit of revolution in their blood. They are heroes, are people who turned against what they call tyranny and foreign occupiers and so on.
When the day will come, it will be a happy day for you?
It will be not a happy day for me. I believe in karma.
I wanted to explain and show you the general foundation that I feel you needed to understand in order to see how America will enter another civil war. America is damaged, and I don't like to admit this, America's dying. America is more divided, hate-filled, desperate, sad, and pissed than ever before. No other time in history have Americans become more polarized, whether it be socially, politically, or mentally. Americans are more divided even more than the American Civil War over the North and the South. And I'm afraid most people don't know it. It's either that or they're just hopelessly holding on to a pipe dream that there is somehow a peaceful solution to this. However, I believe the point of no return has come and gone long ago. There is no political solution, and the only way America is going to solve its issues is with violence, blood spilt on soil, and people taking up arms to kill their fellow countrymen. So, after laying all this foundational knowledge down onto you, how exactly would a civil war be triggered within America? Now, this isn't a question that's easy to answer. There are so many things that could or couldn't happen that it's impossible to figure out to a T. But there are a few things that are consistent with rebellions in countries within the past that we should analyze. First off, who would be most likely to be the factions to pick up guns and fight in a modern civil war? Now, after a long thought process going over many things that would possibly mean to people picking up guns and arms, I've come up with two very likely groups of people fighting. The first group being right-wingers of various extremism and die-hard leftists who support the government and are the government. Now, who do I say are the main forces going to be in these types of groups that are going to be fighting? Simple. With many social, economic, cultural, and political factors that I've explained earlier when talking about a nation divided, there will be two groups of people that will rise to the point of organizing to kill each other. That being disgruntled people who fall within the right in terms of economical and social standings, and who have overall been failed by the status quo in some way, and the left who don't wish to have their standards of living change, meaning they will support the status quo till their dying breath. These are the two groups of people who will most likely pick up arms and either support or attempt to stop a rebellion. And keep in mind, I want to make this clear, this is not going to be a Republican or Democrat issue. Despite how people vote, most people are not genuine Republicans or Democrats. Many, if not most people, feel that the two-party system is not only a massive failure, but it's going to actively hinder any progress and healing in terms of political issues and concerns. The people that do vote mostly only vote either out of a blind patriotism, are pressured by their family to vote one way, or are voting out of spite to hopefully prevent the other side from winning. This civil war is going to transcend weak ties to a two-party political system. This is going to involve people who are either pissed off at the government and the status quo, or people who value the status quo with their lives and are willing to fight or support for it. Now, the right-leaning people will overwhelmingly be people who are either disgruntled or upset at the system. These people have been shunned, shamed, and spat on by the status quo for some time. This is not going to be a spur-of-the-moment rebellion. There are millions of Americans right now, and more increasing every day, who feel that their country has let them down and does not support their beliefs or causes that they need in order to function in that society. This can and will include a whole host of people. This will not be a whites-only movement. There are going to be many other people from all types of walks of life that are going to support this. Minorities, women, men, children even, and teenagers. This is not going to be a whites-only issue. I need to make sure you know that. Minorities of all walks of life are going to support this as well. This is going to include people who lost their jobs due to mechanization or immigration, people who lost their jobs due to social pressure from the left-leaning groups or individuals, people who have been victims of police or government brutality, people who are upset at unfair laws, people who are paying high taxes, people who have criminal records and are just simply mad at the system, people upset with social norms and taboos being pushed or changed, and overall people who have been fucked over in some way or another as what they perceive as the government doing it. The left-leaning people, surprisingly, aren't going to be civilians, at least most of them. Most of the left-leaning people who are actively going to be fighting are people within the military, police, and National Guard who are only going to defend the country and the higher-ups that they have to answer to. This will be people who have enlisted within the military whose job it is to fight for the government and the United States military. Police officers are also going to be part of the ranks who have sworn to keep the peace, and the National Guard, who are semi civilians who volunteer militarily on weekends and short periods in order to keep the peace domestically. These are people who are going to be following orders, or who are simply too afraid to step out of line when dealing with attacking their own countrymen. The amount of left leaning civilians that will be actively fighting will be extremely small. Most left leaning civilians will only be passively supporting the fighters, whether this may be borrowing of funds, property, PR relations, or an overall general moral support. Now that we have a general understanding of who would most likely be fighting in a civil war, we need to see who would win this conflict, who has more advantages when fighting a civil war, and who would be most likely to lose. Let's find out. The first case, whenever looking at any rebellion, is seeing who is going to be supported by the military primarily. Who would the average soldier, police officer, and militiaman support when the time comes to picking up arms and killing each other? And believe it or not, the right has a ginormous advantage towards this. The United States military is overwhelmingly right-leaning, at least its bread and butter being the soldiers. The military of the United States, for all of its history, has always stood to be more right-leaning, to support what they and their fellow countrymen see as right and wrong, to fight for a noble cause, and that cause being for God, their family, and their duty of the country. And if this were to be a civil war, if ordered to attack upon their own countrymen, their own family members, an overwhelming majority of the military would either quit to protect their families or would actively turn against the government, seeing the government as the threat towards the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness they have sworn to protect. However, not all people would quit within the military, whether it be out of blind support of the government, seeing the rebels as a genuine enemy of the people, or simply afraid of stepping out of line. There would still be a decent sized force of the government at its disposal. And not only that, but the government, at least initially, would have a technological advantage. However, how big an advantage that will be explained later. Another thing to take note of is who would have the terrain advantage when fighting a civil war. Who would have a better time fighting? Who could attack easier? Who could bunker in? Who could escape when need be? That would also go towards the right. When you take a look at voting patterns alone in the United States, if we were to go off the red and blue states, most blue states are on the coast or are in the northern part of the United States, while most red states are either in the south or the Midwest of the United States. And this means hell for those blue states. Why? Because not only is the Midwest a myriad of deserts, flatlands, mountains, and forestry, but the accessibility of resources would be an absolute logistical nightmare to try to solve. Since most red states are producer states and most blue states are consumer states, this makes the blue states rely on red states for food, energy, manpower, and just to keep the cities fucking functional. These red states, if they were under control of even some rebels, deliveries of goods would be stopped and seized, making the rebels not only stronger, but making the blue states weaker. Food, ammunition, water, medicine, power, and more can be controlled by rebels. How could people within these blue states fight if they can't even stand to hold a weapon due to malnutrition, disease, and dehydration? A few hundred rebels just minorly loosely creating roadblocks with IEDs strapped to roads, firing lines, garrisons, and seizures of goods could absolutely cripple any state they wanted to. California, New York, Washington, all of the Northeast could become a wasteland of starvation and death without ever having any shots or shells fired. And not only that, but blue states are where an overwhelming majority of blue states rely on electricity a whole lot more than the red states. Red states, while crippled without electricity, would still be relatively okay. However, huge, multi-million populated cities that require electricity to even function at all just to suddenly go without power, that would create massive concrete jungle graveyards to these people. The people who live in cities where they don't produce any of their own food, they rely on electricity to function, and are boxed in from a coastline and a bunch of Midwest red states, that is a hellhole waiting to be created. Electricity could easily be shut off from massive cities. Most electricity we use come from substations. These allow the electricity to be turned on or up based on usage and will offload excess power in case of a sudden increase or decrease happens within an area. Without these substations, the whole city would be disabled of having any electricity. No electricity in a city means no new food being transported, no refrigeration, no sanitation, no resources reaching the masses. This would be hell to deal with. And not only would you have to deal with supply chains being horrifically destroyed, but you'd have to deal with small groups of insurgents who are hate-filled and have access to weapons and are so pissed that they are killing their own countrymen to try to make the land better. This is a horrific fucking logistical nightmare. Another issue that will plague the left will be the overall disapproval of firearms and the use of masculinity. A large percentage of people on the left, in theory, if not in practice, often shun and shame masculinity, a vital thing needed when engaging in violence and war. Not only are the men on the left principled and trained to see firearms, strength, and intelligence as bad things, but the men on the left are weaker in general. Their diets are often grains, chemicals, and vitamins. Meanwhile, the people on the right are more masculine, strong, and they have better diets for long-term fighting and stability. They eat meat. They're extremely pro-Second Amendment. The general accessibility of firearms in America for its citizens alone should scare the ever-loving shit out of leftists. However, I don't see that happening more often, if not ever. Likely, most leftists are too ignorant and principled to even think that the alleged dumb right-wingers would be capable of fighting back against them. It's a grave mistake that I feel a large portion of leftists will make. The right has so many advantages that it makes it seem like I'm going to try to retort back with some advantages the left would have when trying to have a standing chance to make it seem like this would be a relatively equal fight. However, I don't think there are any. Any minor advantage would be so nil, or it would be squished by any of the points I brought up earlier, that it's not even worth bringing up. Like the media, you can't have the modern media without power. It's just gone. There's no way in hell you can have that. There is not a snowball's chance in hell any left-leaning force would have a good time fighting. This is why I feel a civil war hasn't happened yet in America, and that is because we are simply prolonging the inevitable. We're probably already in a civil war right now, we're just not picking up guns to shoot each other with. They are trying to enjoy the ride, so to speak, the longest that they can. This is why so many left-leaning companies in tech and finance are pro-censorship. It hinders the reality that they're on borrowed time. These people cause so much hurt and heartache for the average citizen because it's all they can do. It's why these terms like hate speech are tossed around so common, and it's trying to be pushed as a valid term because it's all they can do. It's why people are deemed extremists and are silenced off of platforms and are revoked of all financial support. It disincentivizes people from hearing the reality that these people are going to be absolutely fucking slaughtered. And what makes it weird to me is that they're only making more radicals. In their bullshit way of claiming that they care about people and stopping hate, they're fueling and funding hate. It makes more radicals every day. And that means another possible soldier that is going to be burning down their business or blowing up their infrastructure. If the left has any advantages, it is so superficial and minor of a bonus that it's worthless to include it. It's just going to be stamped out, even in the short term. While the government could, in theory, request a coalition of soldiers to help aid from the European Union or NATO, it would do more harm than good. It would not only show that the government is so desperate to stop a war that they're resorting to external help to try and quell a rebellion. And not only that, but the rebels have the terrain as their advantage. A reason why the Founding Fathers did so well in the Revolutionary War against the British is that they understood the layout of the land. The British did not. And not only did the Founding Fathers abuse this, but they fought extremely dirty. During that period of time, war was considered to be a gentleman's sport and a place that had ethics and standards. An example of this would be firing up against each other while you lined up and took shots at each other with muskets. However, the Founding Fathers not only abused this, but they fought very, very dirty. They fought so fucking dirty, even by today's standards. They would sneak into camps at night to slit throats. They would destroy and steal supplies. They would just pull the nastiest guerrilla warfare shit on the British. And there would be nothing stopping the rebels of today from abusing this. If not, it would be, think of Geneva Convention violations and war crimes. Car bombs, dirty bombs, converting semi-automatic rifles into fully automatic ones, hit-and-run tactics, scorched earth tactics, stealing equipment, and so much more. It would be hell for both any foreign fighters and native soldiers fighting the rebels. Another huge one that a lot of people will say that the left has is an access to the military's arsenal: tanks, jeeps, jets, and drones. However, this is another point that is moot when you factor in this. All of those weapons are weapons of war and are used to destroy buildings, infrastructure, and the enemy's tanks, jeeps, jets, and drones. And the government would not destroy its own infrastructure. If and when a government becomes truly corrupt and they want to rule over a populace, they cannot use these weapons. You cannot park a tank on every corner of every street. You cannot use jets to stop rebels in pockets of civilians. You cannot use drones to blow up in a home that may have a possible rebel. The collateral damage is so fucking scary that it would only turn more people against your cause by them simply blowing up the homes and businesses of the citizens. And not only that, but a government would be shooting itself in the foot if they were to blow up their own infrastructure. If a government wishes to rule over the land and people, they would be fucking retarded to blow up their own industry and people. A government doesn't want to rule over a bunch of burning rubble and crumbled brick piles. Actually, it would be like the government shooting themselves in the head, not the fucking foot. And on top of that, any rebels or worse, military members who flip on the government and are spies or infiltrators can use these weapons against the government. This is yet another fucking disaster for the government and the left-leaning people. So, how would a civil war start within America? There are a lot of possible ways this could happen. Too many to list or even imagine. There are so many factors just today or tomorrow alone that could spark it in theory. However, I do have a few general possibilities that I believe is very probable. The first case would be another horrific thing happening to a group of people, and a group agency being responsible for this. Think of a modern Waco or Ruby Ridge where innocent people are harmed and killed, and the government is to blame for this travesty. And instead of a lone person acting out in case, there would be no Timothy McVeigh. This would be a small group that decides not only is enough enough, but that the government is evil and they need to be destroyed by any means possible. This is not going to be one or two people going off. This is not going to be a Timothy McVeigh blowing up some Midwestern building. This is going to be a group of dedicated people who are so disgruntled and disenfranchised that they're going to pick up arms and actively seek to destroy the government the most efficiently and brutal way they possibly can.
Now first he lost his pension, sunk into depression. Congress is defecting, it's been adding to the tension. Came back from war and he's been post-traumatic stressing. Can't afford his medicine he took for his aggression. He needs help, relying on a system that rejects him. Took away his benefits but left him with this weapon on a one-way ticket. He's entering the thicket to do the only thing that he's thinking will make a difference. Like, get down on the ground. It's a stick up, nobody make a sound. Don't even hiccup or I'm emptying around. I'm done playing games, so I'm going down in flames. Let it rain over Washington.
Another possibility would be a gun ban or a gun law going into effect, making certain weapons or arms illegal, and they will need to be either restricted, confiscated, or registered. And this will in turn make people get madder and madder. This will lead to people refusing to go along with these laws, and this will lead to law enforcement having to go into people's homes, seizing their property, and arresting them. And if enough people were to see this and spread the message around, this could trigger the shot heard around the world again from someone if enough people either see or are exposed to this. Another possibility that could be is leftist organizations keep winning elections and are holding on to power. People who are disenfranchised from the system will no longer be able to withstand more and more oppression, at least as they see fit, and not being allowed to work, pursue the lives they want to, buy the things they want, and in a desperation of defiance, they are going to start small militia movements, and other like-minded people are going to go on the offensive, engaging in guerrilla warfare. So, how long would a civil war take to end? This is an extremely hard thing to say because there are so many factors that would go into question that I can't even come up with a proper answer that I would have any confidence in. There are just so many factors and minute things that would depend on either happening or not happening. However, I can have a rough prediction on what would happen during and after the right wins the Civil War. I predict that after the right starts gaining ground and starts showing that they are the ones winning, they will most likely do very, very violent things to show their power. They are most likely going to assassinate and execute politicians they feel have wronged them and the country. While this would mostly be left leaning politicians, there will be some right leaning politicians, at least right wing politicians in name, who will have likely been killed as well. This will have been done to both show the power of the rebels and how they can reach even the highly protected and valued members of society. This would also be used to apply to the people that are seen as left leaning or sympathetic celebrities. A lot of these people are going to be lynched, executed, or assassinated in very gruesome ways, hanged from trees and overpasses, shot into mass graves, lined up against walls and shot, blown up with explosives, and very other horrific ways. These people are not going to be spared a quick death at all. These will most likely be recorded and shown to the public as to the enemy for propaganda purposes. As the right starts to gain ground, they are going to start enforcing their own laws, customs, and demands on the populace. For the most part, it is going to be a lot like the American way of life we have now, just the way that they want it to be enforced. They're going to start pressuring people, forcing people, and even possibly killing certain people that are rebel rousers against their cause, and they're going to start enforcing their ways of life. And as the ground is gained by more and more rebels, they're going to start slowly expanding their size. Think of something like Chaz, but more official and with more force, with people with guns and the testosterone and hatred and anger to do such things, that it's going to be forced and expected upon the masses. Like I said, it's going to be a version of what America life used to be back in the day, and a lot of more principality. They're going to be demanding more of what they expect people to act and behave. As the right gains more power, land, and influence over the people, a lot of people on the left are going to start seeing this as a hopeless war effort and will give up. The ones who see the war as a lost cause will simply go AWOL in order to try to distance themselves from the war, and will likely go home to their families and make sure that they're as safe as they can be. The few that will fight to the bitter end will either be killed or eventually be tried as war criminals, similar to the Nuremberg trials. This will lead to a lot of people claiming that they were following orders, only for that to be waved away and found guilty. Most likely, most will serve extremely long prison sentences or will be executed. Now, after the left is defeated and killed, the government and any institutions have been destroyed or have been forcibly converted to go along with the rebels' government. What would the institution's shoes look like after the person that has just been killed in them are trying to get fulfilled by the militia and the insurgents? It's very hard to say. It is going to depend on who is deemed a powerful person and who is influential within the insurgents' higher ups. Since I believe it is safe to say that the idea of rebelling and government will be based upon what the founding fathers did hundreds of years ago, it is likely going to be a government of America that will be a lot like the original foundation that was wanted within the country. Surprisingly, a lot of laws and norms the American people will be accustomed to will still be around. However, there is going to be a stronger and harsher implication of these new laws that are going to be followed to a T. Otherwise, if anyone in a governing position decides to go against this, they could be liable to extremely harsh things such as bankruptcy, death, life sentences. There's going to be a heavy implication and demand that you have to follow what is written on the bills and the laws to a absolute T. There's going to be very little interpretation in a lot of these laws. I do believe that the United States after the Civil War will represent a very weird and interesting hybrid of Nazi Germany and America, a very fascist government, but with a lot of freedoms and a lot of abilities for the people to own guns, pursue life, liberty, and happiness, and for the most part, go back to their normal lives. It's very hard to say this now. It's hard to imagine this, I understand, but I do believe that this would happen. Think of the American founding fathers with a more harsh and disciplined action, where they have to follow the laws, the rights, the Constitution to an absolute T. There will be extremely harsh checks and balances put in place to prevent the issues the rebels saw were plaguing the nation from happening ever again. I also do feel that there will be persecution against certain racial and religious groups. I feel a lot of Jews, minorities that supported the left, and women who also supported the left are going to be harshly treated. This, I feel, will mostly involve a lot of these people being exiled from the country. However, it is possible that out of a form of retribution and violence, a lot of these groups will be genocided against. Jews, I believe, will be the harshest in terms of treatment towards this. This is due to the fact that a lot of Jews are disproportionately in powerful positions, such as governments, Fortune 100 companies, and powerful government positions. Minorities will also see this to some extent, however, since most minorities don't hold powerful positions and will be most likely seen as victims of circumstance. And since that will be the case, they will be most likely pardoned or just given light punishment and will be allowed to integrate into the new country. Women will likely be shamed publicly if they support or sympathize with previous governments. They will likely have their heads shaved or they'll just be publicly humiliated so that they will support the new position of power so they won't get humiliated again. It's not very pretty to admit this, but I do believe this is what will happen. It's it's pretty dark. It's very dark, but I think this is a genuine thing. I'm sorry. It's just I'm sticking with this. After the initial dust is settled, men will become the more dominant and powerful sex in society. After there's no longer initial fears of bombings, shootings, and killings, there is going to have a lot of work done in the forms of repairs, solving domestic issues, getting an economy going again, and working on diplomatic relations to be recognized as not only the most powerful nation, but one under new management. This will mean most women will likely not be forced, but extremely incentivized to become childbearing women for the newly created nation. Voting will also likely be changed. Voting will likely return to how the founding fathers originally intending for voting to happen. People who will only be allowed to vote if they either pay taxes or if they own property, because this means that the ones with a stake in how their elected officials will handle their laws and taxes will want the best possible candidate to run the country. Universal suffrage will be drawn back and it will likely not be instilled for hundreds, if not ever, under the nation's new foundation. Ever. And with that, I don't really know what would happen after a civil war. And like I said earlier at the beginning, even then, this whole video could be all wrong. Because the funny thing about history is that history just seems to just go and do with whatever the fuck it's gonna do. All we can do is just be a part of the ride and slightly influence it. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm glad I got to make this video. This is a topic I've been studying, pondering, thinking, reading, and piecing together for a very long time. And I feel it's something a lot of people do want to talk about, but they don't. Because I think a lot of people are just afraid to speak their mind. However, without conversations like this, no one will get anywhere, and this will only lead to a more and more hatred and buildup of people just bottling up things inside of them. And if we don't let that pressure out, it's only going to lead to a massive explosion. And I don't want that to happen to anyone, metaphorically or literally. I don't want people to be killed in a civil war. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would do it so we could all just get along happily and fucking sing Kumbaya. However, that's not how the world works. I do feel there is a civil war coming to this nation, and likely other Western nations like Europe and Australia. And I want you, the listener, to prepare for this. I want you to learn how to become more self-sufficient. I want you to learn the basics of prepping, storing food, learning how to cultivate crops, how to treat medical emergencies without professional help. Teach yourself how to defend yourself and your family, how to hunt, fish, forage, and how to function more self-sufficiently. Because even if there isn't a civil war, these are invaluable skills that you can gain massive benefits from in a society that has the grit up or not. And I'm not trying to fearmonger, and I'm not calling action to anything. I'm just stating my opinion on a topic that I feel is an inevitability. And I think you should acknowledge it as well, and you should steer yourself to not only survive it, but turn the outcome out to being a better person and a better situation for you and your family. I want you to stay strong, and I want you to stay alive. Thank you, and have a good day.
From the Constitution of the United States of America, 1789. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed.
I got the rifle on my back that my father used to own, and he carried it before me 'cause a man defends his home. Yes, he often hunted deer and for large game indeed. In addition to his sporting, he would tell me of this creed. This gun is good for many things, I've learned to use it well. The founding fathers wrote your rights in stone. One day should our noble country ever go to hell, just remember, son, that tyrants are still made of flesh and bone. Just remember they are made of flesh and bone.
Now this boy became a man, and this man became aware of the enemies that threaten all his rights here and there. You can call them what you want, for they go by many names. It don't matter what you call them, 'cause I'll tell them all the same.
My gun is good for many things, I've learned to use it well. My founding fathers wrote my rights in stone. Oh, I've seen the way a bastard shot my country all to hell. Just remember that your parasites are made of flesh and bone. Just remember that you're made of flesh and bone. There's 100 million patriots and 300 million guns. I would like to see a coward try and take them one by one. There's that phrase that's etched upon the heart of men across the land. You will only take our rights away from all our cold dead hands. Our guns are good for many things, we've learned to use them well. Our founding fathers wrote our rights in stone. Oh, we've seen our noble country take a nosedive into hell. We outnumber you, you parasites, so best leave us alone. Oh, you tyrants are still made of flesh and bone. Oh, our guns are good for many things, we've learned to use them well. Our founding fathers wrote our rights in stone. Oh, the only way to heaven is the rocky road to hell. I just wonder how you tremble as you've seen our numbers grow. Oh, remember you're still made of flesh and bone. Come and take it, I dare you.